Thank you, Euston, and thank you to Laracorp, Economic Society of Singapore, ESSEC, and Europlus for bringing us together at this very well-timed and important dialogue. I must first confess that when I was invited and as I was preparing my mind yesterday for this event, I thought I was going to give a lunchtime talk. And it's always wonderful giving a lunchtime talk because it doesn't actually need to add up to very much. But you hope to say something that's interesting enough to lead to some further discussion amongst people who know more about the subject than you do. So allow me to carry on with my lunchtime talk on this very interesting topic of keys for the global economy. And I can assure you I have the keys and I have all the answers that you need. I say it's timely because as Jean-Michel Blanquart was telling us, more than ever before, there is a temptation to withdraw from things global. And it's happening in many parts of the advanced world especially. Before I go on, I'll have to say that there isn't that same temptation in this part of the world. And it's extremely important to remember that because we're talking about a very large proportion of the world's population in the Asia-Pacific. And you don't sense that same temptation. Progress may be slow in reforms, economies are opening up in fits and starts, but the direction of travel is still towards greater opening. And with or without the TPP, we have the RCEP, the Regional Cooperation and Economic Partnership, which is going to go ahead. We have each country still moving in the direction of further opening up. You still have a continent that's liberalizing and looking for opportunities for cooperative regionalism and cooperative internationalism. So it bears reminding that there are parts of the world where you don't have the same pessimism setting in towards the idea of cooperative regionalism and cooperative internationalism. But we do have a problem because most of the advanced world is facing a loss of confidence that has to do with the sense of ordinary people as to how much they gain from open economies and open societies. And it has to be addressed. It has to be addressed. It is worth reminding ourselves that we are today in a far more globalized state, even with the pessimism we talk about, even with the risk of lack of progress on important new initiatives. We are talking about a world that, with regards to trade, investment, capital flows, is far more globalized than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. That's the new starting point. Globalization is slowing, trade growth is slowing, but it is at a much higher level than it was 10 or 20 years ago, in real terms. We have a problem because, and this is something which economists have always known and should have been emphasized more sharply, open economies are in the interests of the majority of people in each of our societies, but do leave a significant number of people with a loss. And that's in the nature of global trade, that's in the nature of the global economy. That the majority benefit, but there is a group, not insignificant, that loses out. Jobs are lost, wages get depressed, towns and cities get depressed. You can't lose sight of the fact that economies as a whole, which means the majority of populations are doing better, but there is a significant group that has lost out, and there's been inadequate effort to bring them back into the game of common prosperity. And that's the heart of the problem. Most people benefit, but some people lose out. If we leave it to the markets, if we take a simplistic view of how we should go about running globalized economies, then people who lose out can stay out for a long time. Cities that are depressed stay depressed for a long time. There are two alternatives. One alternative is close the door somewhat, withdraw somewhat, in order to help those who have lost out, protect some industries, protect some jobs. There is that temptation, but it doesn't take an economist to point out that most people will then end up losing something. In other words, you do benefit a group of people in specific industries, but most people lose out. So that's the opposite, that's the polar opposite of these simplistic strategies for globalization, where you simply let markets work and you accept the fact that some people lose out. The polar opposite is to withdraw. You do help some people, but most people lose out. The only positive strategy forward is to stay open, find ways in which we can have increased cooperative internationalism, but do far more to help those who lose out. And that requires active public policy, it requires new public-private partnerships, and it requires a new political culture that is about everyone being in the same boat, that is about inclusivity not just in economic terms, but in social terms. And that new positive strategy has to infiltrate our political discussions wherever we are in the world. Stay open so that the majority benefit, but work actively to help those who lose out, inevitably, in the cause of globalization and technological change, to be back in the game and to have new jobs, a new prospect of a career ahead of them, and the prospect of their children being able to do better than them. And that's really the challenge we face, helping globalization and inclusive societies work together rather than at odds with each other. It requires at least three broad dimensions of public policy to receive much stronger attention. First, we have to focus not just on redistribution, which is necessary in every mature democracy in order to ensure that those who lose out don't fall into a deep ditch, but it has to be far more than redistribution. We have to think about regeneration. Regeneration of towns, cities, creation of new jobs, regeneration of neighborhoods in the urban planning sense. Regeneration has to be a primary focus of public policy. National, regional, city, and company level. The geographical dimension of technological change and the effects of globalization has been neglected. The reality is that creative destruction involves creation in some cities and regions and destruction in other cities and regions. It's just been the way the market economy works. There is creative destruction taking place in the global economy and in each of our economies. Singapore, we're lucky because we're just one city-state. But in every large, mature economy, the creation and destruction are taking place in different parts of the country. Regional and city strategies have to be at the fore. There's a reason why Pittsburgh was able to regenerate itself. There's a reason why Lyon was able to regenerate itself into becoming a major digital hub. There's a reason why cities in Baden-Württemberg are doing extremely well. Very low unemployment, business optimism, technological advancement, all reinforcing each other. And there's also a reason why Rust Belt cities are left depressed for long periods of time. Lorraine in France is depressed for a long period of time. Even parts of the Ruhr Valley are left depressed. South of Wales is what it was 20 years ago, still as depressed as ever. And it has to do with politics and local strategy. You can't assume the market will do the job for us. We need active public policies, and the geographical dimension, city-level strategies, offers a lot of prospects for improvement. New public-private partnerships, partnerships with universities and research institutions, and I think the Fraunhofer model in Germany is a very fruitful one. Applied research that's related to what companies are doing and how jobs can be created. There are a lot of lessons we can learn from each other on the whole issue of regenerating industry and jobs in specific locales. And in Singapore, although we are just one city-state, we take our lessons from what's happening in the most vibrant cities around the world. That's our SOP. Just keep taking lessons from the most vibrant cities around the world. So that's the first dimension of public policy that requires far more attention. The second dimension has to do with the vexing issue in productivity all around the advanced world. And that is that whilst on the one hand, we know there are remarkable innovations taking place, almost in every industry vertical, and most especially in ICT, but in fact in every industry vertical, advanced robotics, new materials, artificial intelligence, remarkable innovations, and they're real innovations. The spread of new technologies and ideas and business practices to the rest of industry has been very slow for reasons that no one fully understands. The diffusion of innovation has slowed down for reasons no one understands. So the gap between the frontier and the rest of the economy has widened. And most studies show that that widening of productivity and both levels and rates of growth of productivity between firms at the frontier and firms in the rest of the industry who are well away from the frontier, that widening of the gap is also responsible for much of the inequality that we see around the world. It's not the only source of inequality, but in fact, empirically, it has been a major source of inequality. The best studies in the United States show that, studies in France, in Sweden, in Germany, that this widening gap between firms also explains the widening gap in incomes across society. And we have to tackle that widening gap between firms, speed up learning, speed up the spread of the latest practices, latest software, latest ideas, latest equipment, latest management practices from the leading firms at the frontier to the rest. It serves an economic objective and it also serves a social objective because it's one way in which you can reduce the gaps between wages between one firm and another, and you can get a greater degree of cohesion in our societies. So that's a second very important area of public policy. Not something that's taught in Economics 101, in fact, not even in Economics 401, but it deserves attention. Not looking at aggregates, not looking at averages, but looking at the spread and the diffusion, the gap between the frontier and firms well within the frontier, which is also a gap between the jobs at the frontier and the jobs far away from the frontier. Every economy faces this challenge. We face this challenge in Singapore. We have an externally oriented competitive sector. It's about 60% of our economy that's doing extremely well in productivity growth terms. And we have a significant swath of the economy, largely domestic-related goods and services, that is achieving much weaker progress in productivity. And we've got to find a way in which the lessons from the most competitive firms are transposed to the rest of industry. And that doesn't happen automatically in the market, as we know. Even things which you would have thought benefit small firms disproportionately, like the cloud, even things like that, the uptake among small firms has been extremely weak. No one understands why, but it has to do with management thinking, practices, and we've got to find some way in which that can change, because it's to the benefit of small enterprise. Many of the new technologies we're talking about, the new platforms, the externalities that you're talking, that are the main gains of these new network platforms, are externalities that small firms benefit from the most. And we've got to help them benefit from it. And it requires active public-private partnerships. It requires cluster-level strategies. It requires supply chain strategies that bring the large with the small, the foreign with the local, the frontier with the rest. It doesn't happen automatically in the market, and this is a coordination role that involves the public sector, it involves universities and research institutions, and it involves industry associations and leaders. It also involves a social partnership. We call it tripartism in Singapore. I'm not sure if you use the word social dialogue or social partnership in France, but it is a prime area for the public sector, the business sector, unions, and in the new gig economy, groups of individuals who have affiliation because of their craft or skills, to collaborate, to spread learning as quickly as possible. So that's the second dimension, the spread of new ideas and technologies, which has been slow all over the world. The third dimension has to do with education and training. We know the world of work is changing. Old jobs don't come back, but new jobs can be created. And the new jobs that are going to be created can be quite different from what they used to be, whether it's in manufacturing or finance, logistics, in every area. We have the opportunity of creating many more technologically enriched jobs and augmenting human abilities with technology. And we've got to prepare ourselves for that. We've got to start equipping people for that world of work when they're in their youth, in high school and in the tertiary institutions. But we also have to find a way in which we can keep reinvesting in people, reinvesting in their skills throughout life. And that's a very interesting new area. France is one country that in fact does invest in continual education and is trying to regenerate that whole infrastructure. I know ESSEC, for instance, has got a very active executive education program. On my recent visit, I visited CNAM, which is your National Conservatory for Arts and Skills. Impressive institution, old institution, but finding a new role in a very different future. The central challenge we have is the paradox of skills. On the one hand, employers more than before want people with skills, not just degrees and certifications. They want people with skills, and particularly applied skills. Up and down the line, people who are not just good at thinking, but designing and doing, and blue-collar workers who are involved in thinking, managing, and making decisions in the course of their work. But it's about skills, and everyone having a mix of skills rather than a sharply compartmentalized definition of skills. That's on the one hand, skills are in demand. But the paradox is that the skills that are in demand don't last as long as they used to. So skills are in great demand, and every employer you talk to says, I just can't find enough people with the right skills. But the same employers will admit that the skills we're training people for may not last very long because the pace of change has increased in technology and in the nature of jobs. And this is all the more why we can't front-load education to just the first 18 or 22 years of a person's life, but we have to keep reinvesting in every individual throughout their careers, learning through life, through the job, outside the job, and even in the neighborhoods, learning through life. It requires a new infrastructure, a new form of budgeting, a new form of trainers, because it's not the regular style of learning and the usual type of faculty that you're talking about. It's much more industry related, much more applied, and even different modes of learning, bite-sized, relevant to what people are doing at work. And it's a fascinating and important area. that we all have to invest in. So that's the third dimension. I've spoken about locality, the importance of cities. I've spoken about the importance of spreading knowledge as quickly as possible from the frontier to the rest of society. And thirdly, how do we equip people for a world where skills are in demand far more than degrees and certificates, and those skills keep changing? We can do it. We can do it. It requires a new and more dynamic form of industrial policy and public-private partnerships. And it is essentially, at the end of the day, about inclusivity in our societies. So, I haven't given you all the keys, but I've at least identified the problems. And I must tell you that I'm optimistic because I think there is a way forward. And we've got to put our minds to it and work out new forms of collaboration that will allow us at the end of the day to keep economies open so that the majority can benefit. If we don't deal with those who've lost out, we're not going to be able to keep economies open, and everyone will lose out. So we have to deal proactively, quickly, energetically with everyone who loses out, and focus on regeneration, not just redistribution. That has to be our motto. Thank you.